Hi all, a very good evening, and I welcome all of you today at how Agile Leaders Improve Result with the Responsibility Process webinar. It's a pleasure to have Christopher Avery today with us, and I would like to thank him for giving us an opportunity to conduct a webinar and to share his insight with us. So let's get started. with the agenda. So we'll start with the introduction about the innovation roots, who we are. Then we'll go through the logistic required for this webinar. Then I'll give you a brief about the Christopher Avery. Then Christopher will start the talk on how agile leaders improve our results with the responsibility process. Then hopefully we'll have a great Q&A session. So innovation roots. We are skill transfer journeymen and trusted consulting providers of strategic methodology and technology advisory and solution to enterprise building largest and innovation solution. So the services. We do provide agile consulting and coaching. We provide agile training in-house and public. We are the CA Tech Continuous Delivery Suite official resellers. So logistics. I would request you to please use a LAN cable for joining this webinar. Wi-Fi connection are unstable. Use high quality speakers or headphones for better sound quality. Please keep your microphones muted. All the questions will be taken via Q&A chat. You can drop your all question in a Q&A chat box. The webinar will be recorded. Slides and recording will be made available on SlideShare. So below is the SlideShare URL. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated with upcoming events. We appreciate your cooperation. So Christopher Avery, the responsibility process guy. He is a reformed management consultant. He supports leaders and leadership teams in generating newfound freedom, choice, and power for themselves and others by advising the world's first proven how to approach for understanding, teaching, and taking personal responsibility. So over to Christopher.
Thank you very much. Greetings. Let me see. All right. I'm thrilled to be with you, and my plan is to move pretty quickly through my slides and make room for Q&A. I think that's much more rich than just me going through data. So let me introduce you to the model that changed my life and tell you a little bit of background about myself. So my first career was in trying to help product development organizations move to team-based environments. This was before Agile was a thing. So I've been working in the culture and leadership and team space in software, IT, product development since before Agile. And I was looking for an answer to shared responsibility. So when teams come together, we know that there's a shift in how they operate so that they feel a sense of shared responsibility. Now, not all teams, so I say when teams actually come together, when teams get built. If you think about that great team that you've been on, or when you've been on a great team, there's a natural or an organic, a human shift where we feel a sense of ownership for the project or the initiative. And we also feel a sense of ownership for our relationship with each other because we know that we're trying to get something done that's bigger than ourselves, and simply doing our accountability, our assignment is not going to get that done. So in my search for trying to understand what is this stuff called personal responsibility, where does it come from? I found a research team.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm getting a little feedback here from somewhere. So
Yeah,
check
so
your
I'm
mute.
sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, so can you please share your screen?
Oh, I haven't shared my screen. Thank you. Oops. And there you go. Can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Can you see my screen now?
No.
No,
Chris, no. Not yet. No, not yet.
Interesting. I grew up in a culture that taught me that it's a character trait, and some people have it and some people don't. And yet I noticed that when people care enough about something, then their sense of personal ownership, their sense of personal responsibility alters. And in my experience as a team building consultant, I realized that the most important thing that we needed to do to build powerful teams was to overcome the forces of hierarchy and authority and siloship and titles and roles and accountabilities. We needed to overcome all that for people to feel a sense of shared responsibility. So I was trying to understand how personal responsibility worked, and I actually ran into a research team that was teasing out a pattern in our minds that shows in our psychology and in our human spirit how personal responsibility works. And I've had amazing success now for a long time helping Agile leaders and coaches, Agile teams and Agile organizations use this as a lubricant in order to overcome so much of the friction in Agile environments. So let's move forward. By the way, after a decade of work with teams, learning what I could, I wrote the book Teamwork is an Individual Skill, Getting Your Work Done When Sharing Responsibility, which the major message of is that only you are responsible for the quality of your relationships at work. And most smart, highly educated, ambitious people believe that they're powerless at work to control the quality of their teams. And so that's the number one lesson here, is that you are far more powerful than you know. So I will explain this model to you if you're not familiar with it, but let me just set it up a little bit for you. This is a very recognizable pattern in our minds that we use for processing thoughts about owning or not owning the situations in our lives. So what it tells me is that we are more powerful than we usually give ourselves credit for. In other words, when we're feeling like a victim, or we're beating ourselves up in shame, or we feel burdened or trapped, a sense of obligation, that's actually a mental state that we are at a probably unconscious level choosing to remain in, which if we got off of that state, we could do something about it. So we're powerful in staying there if we want to cope, and we're powerful in getting off of it. The responsibility process also reveals our perceptions of cause and effect. So in the world of work and in the world of life, we're always thinking about what can we do to create the result that we want. So we're thinking in terms of cause and effect. And it turns out that the responsibility process is how our mind perceives cause and effect in different mental states. So we perceive cause and effect in the mental state of blame or lay blame very differently than we perceive cause and effect in the mental state of responsibility. And this is true for you, and it's true for me, and it's true for everybody we know. So this also proves to me that leadership is innate. What I mean by that is that you were born with this compass in you, with this GPS, this global positioning system. You were born with unique genius, with unique inspiration. You were born with unique willpower and awareness. And what that means is that you have everything it takes to lead yourself towards greater and greater, what I call freedom, choice, and power in your life. And I believe that all leadership starts with self-leadership. Self-leadership is about 95% of all leadership, which means if you're using the responsibility process in your mind effectively to lead yourself, then don't be surprised to find lots of other people following you. So I want to get past this one. So we're going to tell you about how Agile leaders use the responsibility process to improve results. So let me give you a few examples here. If you read this quote carefully, you will see some pretty fantastic results, right? Over the last 1 year, 350 people in 9 countries have become way more productive than we ever imagined they could be. Today, we produce twice the software with half the headcount. And then here's a company in Austria called Catalysts. You can look them up. It's catalysts.cc. And they were founded in 2009, and in 2011, the founder and CEO, there he is, his name's Christoph Stendel. He and I met, and he learned about the responsibility process, and he adopted it as one of 2 primary tools to build their leadership and culture around. And today, Catalyst is a huge, very successful software development firm working on the Hyperloop project and some amazingly sophisticated projects. They are ranked first among IT innovators in Upper Austria, and they've been voted the most popular employer in Austria in 2012, 14, 15, and 16. Highly recommend that you get to know a little bit more about Catalysts if you're interested in, let's say, an ownership mindset and culture over traditional ways of running organizations. And then my friend Andy, who's one of the executive partners of Das Scrum team in Germany. And I won't read the quote there, I'll let you read it. And instead, I'll tell you that Andy is getting ready to roll out the first certified Agile leadership workshops. That's the Scrum approved CAL certification based on the responsibility process. So it's active out there and being used very well by lots of Agile leaders and coaches. And today's talk is based loosely on an article I wrote that you can find on LinkedIn, how Agile leaders improve results with the responsibility process. And you'll have access to these slides as you were told on the Innovation Roots slide share. So here's what breaks my heart. Every day I see smart, ambitious, responsible professionals stuck in lives and jobs they don't want and think they can't change. So remember, I opened by saying we're far more powerful than we usually give ourselves credit for. And so if you find yourself in situations that are highly frustrating that you don't think you can do anything about, what I want you to know is that you're more powerful than that. There are things that you can do, and the responsibility process will help you learn what to do about that. So let me tell you about the process. The responsibility process, again, it's a pattern in our minds, and it gets triggered every time something goes wrong. So you see this orange arrow here that says problem. Well, it turns out that in the history of experts and gurus and philosophers writing about personal responsibility, they have recorded that personal responsibility is not about what happens to you or about your station in life. It's about how you respond to what you've been dealt. So it's not about what happens, it's about how you respond. And Stephen Covey said, in between stimulus and response is a space. And in that space is choice. In between stimulus and response is a space. And in that space is choice. And so this idea that the responsibility process gets triggered with a problem is really important to understand, because by problem, what I mean is that you're moving along in life and then something happens that blocks you, whether it's just spilling, tea down the front of your shirt, or tripping over a crack in the street, or somebody not showing up at your meeting that you needed to be there for something important. Now, all these little problems, what happens in our mind is that we're in motion towards a goal and we get blocked. And so if you think about a force field diagram, or if you put your two fists together and push, right? You've got one force going in one way, you've got a counter force going the other way, and you're stuck. You've got what we call stasis, or stuck, or stopped. And when that happens, it creates a little anxiety. It creates a little frustration, a little upset in the mind. And every time that happens, the responsibility process gets triggered. And what happens is that your mind tries to help you cope with this problem by giving you a ready-made answer. And the first answer it gives you is lay blame. So I'll give you an example. I'm working away in my office. I have an appointment to go to. I reach for that place. I always keep my car keys, and they're not there. And my first thought is, who took my keys? They were right here. And it doesn't matter how long I have been aware of the responsibility process or how long I've had a responsibility practice of owning my life. Still, every time something goes wrong, my mind is programmed, it's conditioned to go to blame. If I decide to accept whatever the blame is, I stay there. So if I believe I'm a victim of somebody else, and that they've done something, another department or another function or another team has done something to harm me, then the assumption in blame is that my life won't get better until they change. So this is how this is really valuable as a tool for change in leadership, because if we can realize we're in the mental state of blame, we realize that we are powerless until we get off of blame, because in blame we're absolutely sure that the real problem is out there, it's somebody else, and that nothing can change for us until we change. And I don't know about you, but I don't consider that to be leadership. I also don't consider that to be change. That's being powerless. It's being a victim. Interestingly, if we decide to quit blaming, because we were raised well, we were told we shouldn't blame, and we find ourselves blaming, and we decide, okay, blaming won't do any good. It only gives my power away to that person. Then your mind is programmed to then find another reason, another rationale. We call this a justify. So I reach for my keys, they're not there. I think, who took my keys? And then I realize, wait a minute, nobody's been in my office since I came to work. And I drove to work, which means there's nobody to blame. So then my mind starts making up this amazing story. Well, no wonder I can't find my keys. When I came to work this morning, I was solving a big bad problem on the phone with somebody. My desk phone was ringing as I unlocked my door. My door was actually unlocked and ajar. I thought I'd been burglarized. There was papers and everything all over my office. No, the window was broken, and there was a storm last night, and the rain and the wind came in and blew everything around. Certainly anybody could have forgot where they put their keys. So I hope you recognize this notion of justify. You and I are really, really good at this, and it's a really good way of coping with problems that we don't yet know how to take ownership of or don't think we can. And your mind has done such a great job of helping you cope with the problem, cope with your anxiety, by telling you a story that there's nothing you can do because the problem is bigger than you and it's beyond your control. So the types of justify that we use are, it's the economy, it's the job market. I didn't have enough time. That's procedure, that's process. And the number one justify I deal with in my corporate change work is, that's just the way it is around here. That's the way management has always been. That's the way management will always be. Therefore, there's nothing you can do about it. So essentially, if you find yourself complaining about or coping with the same thing over and over and over with a rationale or a reason or a story, you might be in the mental state of justify around that. And I'll tell you, there's nothing wrong with you. We're programmed to do this. You were taught probably as you grew up that you shouldn't do these things. But what you weren't taught is that it's absolutely natural as a human being, and it's the way we deal with crap that we don't know how to take ownership of and change. And yes, I did say crap. It's how we deal with stuff, things going wrong. And how many times a day do things go wrong? And guess what? We have all those meetings, emergency meetings about at work, stuff going wrong. So you can imagine this pattern, the responsibility process is very active in your mind and in the minds of people you work with. So if you decide to stop justifying, and you can, if you can recognize the mental state and tell yourself, I'm justifying, and justifying isn't going to do me any good, but make me feel a little better at the moment about my anxiety, but it's not going to find or solve the real problem. If you stop justifying, then the next thing that happens is you land in the mental state of shame. And if you notice where you have been pointing outside of you as the source of the problem, in shame, you reverse that and you look internal. And you say, oh, I'm the dummy, I'm the dolt, I'm so stupid, I did this to myself, I deserve this because I shouldn't have spoken up, I shouldn't have taken the risk, I shouldn't have put myself out there, what a dummy I am, what a dolt I am, when will I never learn? So it's in green because this is where society has taught us that if you're doing this, you're, quote, being a responsible person. You're conforming to social norms. You've even been reinforced your whole life for beating yourself up. They say, oh, good boy, she's taking responsibility. And yet it's not, because your focus is on what's wrong with you, instead of your focus on clear thinking about the real problem and a real solution. And so one of the things that we say is that if you find yourself beating yourself up, and asking yourself, what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. You're behaving normally. You're behaving exactly the way we were designed to cope with problems when we decide to quit blaming and justifying. And by the way, if you want a tip, here's a tip worth your whole investment in this webinar. When you find yourself asking yourself, what's wrong with me? Stop it. And the reason is that this wonderful computer in your mind will answer the question, and it will make a long list of all the things that you can possibly find that might be wrong with you. And I've already told you there's nothing wrong with you. So instead of saying, what's wrong with me? A better question is, oh, look at this mess I've gotten myself into. What do I want that I can do something about? And the what do I want question is the best question I've found to trigger true ownership or responsibility in our mind. Okay, next step. This pattern continues. We are so good at coping with crap instead of taking ownership that if we decide to quit beating ourselves up, the next mental state is the mental state of obligation. And in the mental state of obligation, it's the mental state of have to, don't want to. So we have to do something we don't want to do. We have to be somebody we don't want to be. We have to put up with having something that we don't want to have. And we feel like we have no choice. In the mental state of obligation, it's feeling completely trapped, completely burdened in some kind of a promise or a commitment or a flow or a pattern that we think that we can't change. So if you're wondering if you have some of this obligation, some questions might be, do you have some stupid meeting, hopefully not this one, that you have to go to? You only go to it because you have no choice. It's a stupid meeting. I have to. Do you have some stupid paperwork you have to do? The only reason you do it is because you have to. Do you have to go to your kids' events after work? Do you say to your friends, oh, I'd love to go get a beverage with you after work, but I have this kid thing I have to do, right? Or do you have to go to your in-laws for holidays? Think of it. Have to, have to, have to, have to, have to. Seems to be the life of a smart, highly educated, ambitious professional. Think about how many times a day we use that language of have to. What we're saying is, I'm no longer in charge of my life. I made some decisions in the past that I thought were good decisions, and they come along with all this other stuff that I don't want. I just seem to have to put up with it. It's also in green along with shame because society has told you that if you're doing what you're supposed to do, even if you don't like it, that you're being responsible. And so what that says is that being a responsible person is different than taking 100% responsibility for your life and situations. That being a responsible person means conforming to the expectations of society. It means being a good member of society. So generally what that means is staying in school, getting a good education, getting a good job, becoming part of a family unit, and contributing to society. If you're doing all of those things, check the box, right? You are a responsible person as far as society is concerned. But staying in shame and obligation is not solving problems for you, right? It's just a place of coping with anxiety. And people ask me, Christopher, what's wrong with obligation? Isn't that how we design work? We hire people and then we hold them accountable. And I say, well, there's nothing wrong with obligation. It is a natural mental state, and it's a state we land in when we don't know how to solve our problem, but we're not willing to externalize it on other people. So I want you to very clearly get that there's nothing wrong with any of these mental states. There's nothing wrong when you're feeling them, and there's nothing wrong with others when they're exhibiting them. They're simply coping with the problem that they don't know how to truly own and truly solve. And that's the humanity that this process brings, that the people I work with around the responsibility process, we generate great forgiveness and great compassion for each other because we realize how strong these coping mechanisms are. But anyway, I was answering the question, what's wrong with obligation? So nothing's wrong with obligation, but here's what you might want to think about if you're interested in happiness, freedom, power, and results. And that is that in the mental state of obligation, two things happen. One is your performance is barely adequate to get a pass. Because when you're in that stupid meeting or doing that dumb paperwork, you're not actually invested in it. Your motivation is simply to survive the trap, survive the burden for the time being. So your motivation is very low. Think about any time you've asked somebody to do something for you, and maybe you were a boss or a parent and required them to do it, and they did it out of obligation. And think about how good of a job did they do. The second thing about obligation is that it builds up this resentment in our minds. And the resentment takes away from all of our true ability to think and be creative. And the resentment is resentment towards whoever it is that we think has us trapped, whether it's the boss, the spouse, the elderly parents that need us, the kids that need us, the mortgage, the bank, the company, whatever it is. And here's the truth about it. The truth is that if you've been making your own decisions for more than a few years, then you are the architect of your own reality. And therefore, if you want something in your reality to change, you're the only one who can change it. You're the one who gets to reformat it. So, guess what happens if we refuse to stay in obligation? Above the mental state of obligation is the mental state of responsibility. And responsibility is a mental state where you seem to have access to much more of your modern brain. In the positions below the line, we seem to be operating from much more of a limbic brain, or reptilian brain even. And in the mental state of responsibility, we are in that space. We're suspended in that space between stimulus and response. And instead of a knee-jerk reaction to cope with the anxiety, we actually feel like we are in a mental state of freedom, power, and choice, and we have the ability to overcome any problem, to face any challenge, and to learn and grow. So it is the ability to respond. And every time you have grown in your life, you have gone from the bottom of this chart to the top over and over and over. And you've done it tens of thousands of times in order to grow into the unique and powerful and wonderful and beautiful human being that you are today. So what am I sharing this model for with you? Well, it's because you did it without knowing you were doing it. So I want to reinforce that it's a natural process that's in all of us, and I can help you learn how to spend less time in the red and the green on this chart and get to the blue on this chart much faster. So there's a couple of other spots here that I'm going to ask you to go learn about on your own, quit and denial. And I'm going to move on and help you understand how to apply the responsibility process and then get to your questions. Please be posting questions, and we're going to get to them. So just so you understand, in blame, the feeling tone, the emotional tone of the language is it's them. The cause for my problem is them. In justify, the feeling tone is it's the circumstances. And circumstances are always outside of our control, right? And the feeling tone of shame is guilt. I deserve this. I deserve this problem. And the feeling tone of obligation is I have to. I have no choice. I'm trapped. And the feeling tone of responsibility is I am free. Right? I have choice. I am powerful. And so are you. Now, what I want you to understand is that the responsibility process, which is the result of research over only the last 30 years, and to me it's the first how-to approach for understanding, teaching, and taking personal responsibility. It's really inspiring. However, there's nothing you can do to change it, right? This pattern is part of our human makeup, just like you can't really change your digestive process, you can't really change your circulation process, you really can't change the process by which your lungs turn air into blood gases. You can't change the responsibility process in you. All you can do is work with it, which means you can realize when you're operating in blame and justify, and you can realize that when you're there, you get no results, and choose to get off of those mental states. And you can realize that when you're in shame and obligation, and realize that you only get unsatisfying results. Because in shame and obligation, we do get into motion. We do stuff, but the results are not satisfying either from a productivity standpoint or from a human experience standpoint of having a life at work or being a happy person. And the only place where we get results that truly matter is in the mental state of responsibility. So the thing to put your attention on is about developing a responsibility practice that helps you recognize when you're at the bottom of the chart and helps you figure out how to move to the top. Now, maybe the most important thing I've told you today, stop it if you're getting ready to text that person you dearly love and say, honey, I now know what's wrong with you. You're stuck in justify. And the reason is that the responsibility process materials and information and tools that I've had the good fortune to create along with my mentor and team, it only works when self-applied, which means it's a dumb management tool. It's a brilliant self-leadership tool. And if you use it as a weapon, if you use it to hit somebody else over the head and say, you're stuck in blame, oh, that's a justify, right? Then what you're actually doing is making the problem bigger. You're using it as a weapon. They did have one problem for which you could have some compassion and some understanding, and you could work to figure out how to help them with it. But if you hit them over the head with the responsibility process and say, hey, you're in obligation, they now have two problems, and their bigger problem at this moment is you. So I want you to use this tool as a self-leadership tool for a very long time before you start thinking about applying it in your relationships and teams. And I do want you to apply it in your relationships and teams, but here's the secret. This is 10,000 times easier to see in other people than it is to see in yourself. So you're only going to notice it in others. And if you only pay attention to others and in labeling others and using it to judge and criticize others and use it as a weapon for others, you're never going to grow. Right? So instead, when you see it in other people, what I want you to do is say, wow, I wonder if I've been missing the same behavior in myself. Right? I wonder how many times I've blamed today. How many times have I justified? How many times have I beat myself up, etc. Okay? Thank you. Now, I'm going to give you a few of the ways that Agilists are using this to get better results. So the first thing is, it is the most fundamental, most foundational, most valuable tool that we know for understanding responsiveness, right? And, you know, if the Agile Manifesto, one of the basic values of the Agile Manifesto is responding to change. Well, in all the coping states below the line, blame, justify, shame, obligation, that's a sign that you're defending or resisting change that's happening around you. And if you want to be more, and so here's a deep thought. The truth is that you are creating your own unhappiness by staying there. And so if you want to turn that around, the way you turn that around is to figure out how to get to the mental state of responsibility where you see something that you can do to help to solve the problem. Increasingly, the world of Agile and Agile leadership and Agile culture and Agile mindset is seeing the responsibility process as the essence, the very essence of agility at the human level. What if you had an agreement with the people that you work with to do their very best to operate from responsibility and to be very supportive of each other in helping to get there, right? So the responsibility process is also at the very foundation of self-organization and self-leadership. We rely on ownership as a huge value. In the original literature on Scrum, the idea of teams taking ownership of their work is foundational. And I don't know a better language for talking about ownership than the responsibility process. You could use this in your retrospectives. You could use this in your team agreements as a way to start talking about, not as a weapon, not to hit each other over the head, but just to say, hey, I've learned something about how my mind copes with stuff that I don't think I can do anything about. And I realize that I spend a lot of time in blame and justify and shame and obligation, and I'm working to try and get myself out of those coping mechanisms a little bit faster, maybe 1% a year faster, or 1% a month faster, or 1% a quarter. And what if we supported each other and used this as a language for helping each other recognize where we are in these coping states? How would that contribute to our Agile processes? It's huge for owning and confronting impediments. So I've done a fair amount of writing. You can look this up on what I call problems between. And the idea of problems between is that the biggest problems in organizations are not problems within roles, problems within teams, problems within departments, or problems within organizations. They're problems between roles, between, say, coders and testers, between, say, product owners and customers, right? The biggest problems are problems between roles, between departments, right? Between, say, HR and IT, between marketing and IT, and between organizations. And so the problem between in this graphic is represented by the red X between HR and IT. And the way we design organizations is we design structures and we provide roles and job descriptions and accountabilities. And the better we do that, the more we create gaps, the more we create margins between roles, between teams, between departments, and between organizations. And who owns the gaps? Nobody, right? Which means the biggest problems go unresolved in most organizations because they're in the gaps between roles, between teams, between organizations. And one of the most fundamental things we must learn about shared responsibility, teamwork, collaboration in organizations is that somebody has to step out and feel a sense of ownership for that problem between. So if I'm HR And that problem between, if I'm smart enough to not look at IT and think that IT is my problem or that IT is making my life horrible, and if I'm actually willing to expand my sense of ownership to include the problem between, then I'm likely to go to IT and say, does this hurt for you the way it hurts for me? And that's the beginning of starting to take ownership of and confront impediments, which is huge part of Agile. Without the idea of shared ownership, we're not going to own and confront impediments. Here's a tool that I want you to put to work today if the responsibility process is meaningful to you. I want you to take a Post-it note or an index card, something you can stick in your pocket and carry around with you. Actually, I want you to do it tomorrow, not today. I realize it's the end of your day today. And at the top of the Post-it note, write one of our words, try blame, and then the next day justify, and the next day shame, and the next day obligation, and the next day responsibility. And draw a line down the center of the card. And on one side, write, I got off of it. What we're referring to is we're talking about the coping mental state. I got off of the mental state of blame. And on the right side, it got out. What that means is I actually blamed, right? Instead of just having the thought, it actually got out. And then go through your day, and every 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, look at the card and see if it's time to make a mark on either the right side or the left side. So every time you actually hear yourself blaming, right, those darn managers, right, then put a mark on the right. And if you actually have the thought, but you decide to stop blaming before it gets out, give yourself a mark on the left. And at the end of the day, you get 10 points for every mark on the left. So that would be 30 points on my card here. And you get 1 point for each mark on the right. It got out. So that would be 13 points. So we get a total of 43 points for the day. And you might ask, why do I get a point for it got out? Well, you get a point for recognizing it. Every time you build awareness of what it's like to be you when you're blaming, every time you get more and more and more aware of that, you're putting yourself closer to choice to get off of it, right? You cannot avoid it. Every time something goes wrong, you'll have the thought. So the issue is getting off of it and moving up the responsibility process towards the mental state of responsibility. Please engage this exercise tomorrow. I've had hundreds and hundreds of people let me know that they did this exercise for a week and it changed their awareness of themselves more than anything else they've ever done. It profoundly changed their behavior. Please do it. All right, I'm about ready to take your questions. So Albert Einstein, I've known this quote for so long, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. If you think about it, blame, justify, shame, obligation, and responsibility are all different levels of consciousness. And, I used to think that what Einstein was talking about was some great fundamental shift of the world's consciousness. And now I realize he's just talking about mine, my own. And I realize that I'm powerful enough to overcome any challenge, any obstacle, solve any problem in my life if I'm willing to change from the level of consciousness where I first created or recognized the problem to the level where I can grow to overcome it and do something about it. So I am ready for your questions.
So there is one question from Anish. Corporate games often target for a neck to green, often with disastrous consequences, while on the other side, people avoid all cost being in such situation. How can be responsible in such situation without quitting and getting crucified?
Let me make sure I understand the question. So I think what you said is corporate situations often put us in the red and the green.
Yeah.
How can I take responsibility for that situation without either leaving the organization or getting fired?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay. And who asked that?
Ish.
Ish? Thank you, Ish. I think you asked the multi-million dollar question and what's on everybody's mind. My recommendation is that you start taking responsibility in small ways in your life and move towards larger and larger things. I understand that the way many organizations operate is that they operate with a consciousness at the bottom of the responsibility ladder. And they get things done through force and control and not through a sense of ownership and joy and positivity. I recommend to you that you look at creating teams where you are, that you take responsibility for what you can. For the other things, I recommend that you actually realize that you're staying in those mental states as a type of a fortress, right? So think of the coping states of blame and justify and shame and obligation as a fortress where you shield yourself in order to find safety. We sometimes think of that as a prison. It's a coping prison, but it's also a sanctuary when we don't know how to actually take ownership of the real problem. So if you will actually, first of all, I would say, refuse to participate in the blaming and the justifying. Right? If you're in a role as a leader or coach, adopt our #1 principle of leadership, of what we call the leadership gift. And that #1 principle of leadership is that how you respond to problems in your organization is teaching your team about how to survive in your organization. So if the way you respond to problems in front of your team is to blame others, then you're teaching your team to blame as a way to thrive. Thrive sounds like a horrible word. As a way to survive, as a way to fortify yourself, to stay in your fortress in this organization. If you justify what's happening in front of your team, you're teaching your team to come up with justifications and excuses. Now it's where it gets difficult. If you beat yourself up, right? If you hang your head with self-pity and say, oh, it's my fault, right? I'll take the hit. I'm responsible in front of your team. You're teaching your team to do the same thing. And if in front of your team you say, we have no choice, we have to, then you're teaching your team the lower levels of consciousness on the scale. This is the harsh truth about this pattern in our minds, is it will reveal truth to you. And you just revealed truth to me by asking the question that you did. Yes, many of our organizations, most of them, do not operate at the top of this chart. So the question is, if I want to be free, powerful, and at choice, if I want to produce results that matter, if I want to be a happier, more successful, and effective person, what do I get to do? Well, I get to practice responsibility where I am. And maybe if I can build up a little bit more freedom and power, I can recruit others to practice this with me. So all I can tell you is that I have gotten to where I will not work for an organization unless I can start with the person who's most responsible for setting the norms in that organization and be that person's personal coach to adopt a responsibility practice. Because when I work, say, in the middle of an organization and really do deep work and help people wake up and realize how responsible they are for their lives, whether they believe it or not, then many people choose to leave because they believe they deserve better leadership. So yes, I hear your question when you say, how do we practice responsibility without quitting or being fired? I will also tell you that sometimes the reason that we don't speak up and take responsibility is because we will get in trouble. So sometimes organizations that operate at the bottom of that ladder of the responsibility process, they will fire their most responsible people for speaking up, for saying the truth, for seeing real problems and wanting to do something about them. So my hope is that I've planted a seed for you here that you can start using. I don't have every answer for you. You know, a lot of leadership coaches say, oh, leadership is easy, just do A, B, and C and you'll be successful. I don't say that. I say leadership is hard, and here is a very effective way to look at it, and that is that when you change yourself, you change the problems around you. When you change the way you look at problems, the problems that you look at change. And so I hope that that's a little bit of addressing your question and helping you think about what to do. How about another question?
So there is a question from Prashant. How good is to have a competition within team? How this is going to impact responsibility?
Let me make sure I understand. So thank you, Prashant. So how good is team competition within teams? And how is that going to affect responsibility? Is that the question?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so I would think of healthy and unhealthy competition. I think of healthy competition as informal competition between people who have very high regard and high respect for each other. I would think setting up a competition among people in order to pit them against each other creates very, very harmful side effects. And those harmful side effects is that it instills fear and it instills isolation, and it absolutely kills the idea of shared responsibility. And so I'm always trying to overcome the isolation of people in roles by building a sense of shared responsibility. And I do not believe in using, I won't say I don't believe in competition. I like for any competition within teams or organizations to be a fun, friendly competition that's generated by the members themselves. You know, like see who's going to get to the last bug on the board or something like that, but not imposed on them by somebody outside of the team. Thanks, Prashant.
Yeah,
What else?
thank you. Yeah, so one more question from Sunil. What is the difference between sense of ownership and responsibility?
Thank you, Sunil. So responsibility has a million meanings. And we use the word responsibility actually for all of those words, right? For labeling, we say it's his responsibility. And for justify, we say it's not my responsibility. And for shame, we say it's my responsibility. So what you must realize is that we use the word for lots and lots of different meanings. The way that I use the word, and by the way, I recommend that you download a poster of the responsibility process. Let me find that. I had it as I had it as a slide, and I must have hidden it. If you go to ChristopherAvery.com, ChristopherAvery.com/poster, P-O-S-T-E-R, you can download a poster of the responsibility process, and on the back of the poster, it has a summary of all the teaching points that I've made today, and it has a definition of each of the mental states. So again, it's Christopher Avery, just like my name, .com/poster, P-O-S-T-E-R. And we have the poster in 27 languages. And on the back, responsibility is defined as owning your power and ability to create, choose, and attract. So Sunil, what we mean by that is that you are always creating, choosing, and attracting the experience that you're having. And that means that if you're not owning it, if you're saying that the problem is out there, I didn't do this, right? This is wrong. I don't deserve this. Then you're not owning it. And when you shift to the place of, wow, how did I create, choose, or attract this problem? How did I create, choose, or attract this mess? And get yourself past shame, because the danger is that you land in shame and beat yourself up. But if you actually get past shame and past obligation, then your mind starts helping you figure out how you're continuing to keep that problem going in your reality and what you can do to change it. So the difference between a sense of ownership and responsibility is really in the meaning of, for me, true responsibility is owning it. It's owning it all. It's I'm creating my entire experience, and if there's anything I don't like about it, there's only one person who can change that. And I've practiced enough responsibility enough to know that I can change anything. And that it's not about your lot in life or where you were born or what you were born into. It's about how you respond. So thank you very much for your questions. I assume that we're close or out of time, so I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Christopher.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christopher, and all the participants. I hope this session would really help all the participants in the workplace, and I am hoping to see you again all. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much, Christopher.
Thank you, everybody.